AudioEye webinar series celebrating the 33rd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, history lesson and fireside chat with Tony Coelho, the primary sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and David Moradi, AudioEye CEO.
Welcome to the Fireside Chat today. My name is David Moradi, CEO of AudioEye. I'm wearing a white polo shirt. I'm pleased to be joined today with Tony Coelho, author of the ADA and former House Majority Whip, and a former chairman and current member of the board of directors of the Epilepsy Foundation. We are proud to work with Tony as an independent director here at AudioEye. Tony, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thank you, David. I'm wearing a light purple shirt, white hair, and I'm a white male.
Thank you so much for that. The first question I have, Tony, is can you share with us your personal experience with disability and how this opened your eyes to the lack of awareness of the experiences with people with disabilities?
When I was a young person, David, I had an accident on my family's dairy farm, hit my head. A year later, I had a grand mal seizure in the barn that I was milking in. And my parents decided that if you had epilepsy, it meant that you were possessed by the devil. They were very religious and believed what the church basically was preaching. I went and had these passing out spells for a period of time. I went to Loyola University and then I decided I wanted to become a Catholic priest. I was denied entry because canon law said if you have epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you can't be a priest. I became suicidal. I was fine after that, went on to Washington as a result of living with Bob Hope for a while, his suggestions to get into politics. And then I realized as a staffer that we didn't have our basic civil rights, that we could be discriminated against illegally. And so when I became a member of Congress, I decided I wanted to do something about that and worked with the Reagan administration in order to get something done and put in the legislation. And it was a little bit controversial, particularly on the House side, but we got it through. And 33 years ago, it became law.
Great. When did you get into Congress to start working on this?
I got elected in 1978 and started working on this in, I would say, 1981, something along that line. And we were able then to get a draft going. And I got Senator Weicker from Connecticut became the Republican Senate sponsor. And so what we were trying to do is to make sure we had a bipartisan Democrat, Republican, and bicameral, meaning House and Senate, so that we covered most of the bases politically, and that worked. And then in the next session of Congress, we got it through.
And so it took about 9 or 10 years to pass once you got into Congress?
Once I got into Congress, it's actually shorter than that, probably around 5 years, that when we really got into it. And then it, it's a major civil rights piece of legislation, and it passed rather quickly based on that. It took a lot of effort to get it done, but we got it done.
Looking back on the past 33 years since the ADA was passed, what do you consider to be the most significant achievements in terms of advancing disability rights and accessibility?
Well, the most important thing is we had a president, attorney general, and the head of the Civil Rights Division and Justice who enforced the law. I mean, the ADA is just a piece of paper, and you have to have the government enforcing the law. So that's the most significant thing. You had an administration that was willing to do it. And today, that's still the case. There was just a case filed where it went after a school district that segregated basically young kids with disabilities. And so the government took action on that. So with having a partner like the government that's willing to enforce the law, it is successful. So that has to be the most important thing. A lot of negatives and things that haven't been done, but that is really one of the biggest. Now, the other part of that that's big is that when we adopted, several other countries now have adopted an ADA. Over 52 different countries have a law similar to ours, not exactly, but worldwide compliance to a ADA or understanding that people with disabilities have some rights is now a world issue. And so that's a wonderful, positive thing from the ADA.
Definitely. When did they start enforcing the law once it was passed, I believe in 1990?
It was under President Clinton's, Papa Bush, basically, as I call him, signed the bill. And then they had staff that was very positive about pursuing it. And the Attorney General, then a very close friend, was enforcing it at that period of time. And then when Clinton got in, the Attorney General was positive, and Tom Perez became the head of the Civil Rights Division, and he aggressively enforced the ADA. That's when it first started being pushed at that time.
This is in the 1990s.
Right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, great. Can you share any personal anecdotes or stories that have touched your heart and highlighted the positive impact of the ADA on individuals with disabilities?
Yes, so many different people have been impacted positively. I had a young fellow who was being discriminated against because he was in a wheelchair and used actually a power chair, and the school was unwilling to give him the accommodations that he needed, and so he got that. Another case was that I had a young lady and a young man, both had disabilities, got them jobs. They didn't know each other. They ended up getting married and have 2 kids. And so you have a situation where these people weren't going anywhere without the ADAs being able to support them. And then the enforcement of it, it made a difference in their life. They can be married, they can own a home, they can take care of their kids. That's what it's all about, is giving people with disabilities the opportunity to fail, which means then they get the opportunity to succeed. So that's what's exciting about it. And I see that practically every day. I get comments and words about it.
Those folks met at work after they were able to get those jobs they wouldn't have been able to get prior to that.
That's right. And then being able, both of them have a disability, and then having 2 kids and taking care of their kids, and they've grown now. But that's kind of exciting. That's what it's all about, is that without the ADA, they would not have had jobs. They probably would have never got met, never would have gotten married, and so forth. So if you take all those things, ADA is responsible for that. Those people are paying taxes. And that's what I love. I mean, I love the fact that we couldn't get jobs before. We were legally discriminated against. And now people with disabilities can get jobs. We need more and more jobs, quite obviously, but can get jobs, can participate in society. And more important, they can pay taxes along with everybody else. A lot of people critical and saying, well, it's handouts. No, it's not. They participate, they pay taxes, and they do good work.
Yep, that's amazing. On the 33rd anniversary of the ADA, what do you hope can be accomplished over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, one of the things that I hope to be accomplished, David, is within the next few months. And that is for all this time, people who are sight impaired, hearing impaired, and physically impaired could not access the internet. And I feel strongly that the ADA covered it. However, some courts have said no. And so we've had this fight. And so over a 13-year period, we've been working to try to get the White House to correct that. And I would say within a couple of weeks, that'll be resolved. So after 13 years, it's making some progress. What that means is that the people who develop software and so forth have to make sure that that software is accessible. And when we went through the pandemic, I think those so-called able-bodied folks, they had a way to pay bills and to shop and so forth, all through the internet. Just think of people with disabilities. They still haven't been able to access the internet. And so that's I say it's a moral issue. But I think more exciting about that, David, is that if we do correct this and the internet becomes accessible, just think worldwide, that'll have an impact because people all over the world will be using the internet. And so it's not just here in the United States. That whole effort would have a huge, huge impact. So that's the one thing immediately that I've been working on. The second thing, of course, is jobs. Making it possible for people with disabilities to get jobs. That really comes down to the CEOs of companies who say to their people, we want to hire people with disabilities. But that's a long time effort. We've made progress. Federal contractors and subcontractors now, as a result of an effort I worked on, have to hire people with disabilities. So we're making progress. The accessibility part is my big one. I think that would make a huge, huge difference.
You've been working on this for a long time. I think you said 13 years, and you expect things to change in the near term for the internet as well?
Yep, I expect that to work. In a couple of weeks, we'll be able to announce that the rulemaking takes place, and that should be resolved in the next few months, then where it would be published in the Federal Register and it would be the law of the land. So that's exciting. I don't know much that would stop it right now, David. It seems to me that we're on a path. It was blocked in the White House for all these years, and we're getting that out. And so that's the positive thing. And so I feel good that we're finally going to be able to make that change.
Yeah, this administration seems to be taking it very seriously.
Right.
So that's great to see.
Yeah, the Justice Department has been very aggressive in getting it down. They're the ones that had to do the research, economic consequences and all that stuff, and the cost as opposed to benefits. They went through all that. It's been presented. They submitted it to the White House. The White House is moving on that. Then it goes through the all the hurdles that have to be done, but they're not major stops. Basically, it's just administrative hurdles to get this done.
Well, fingers crossed. That would be amazing for folks with disabilities to be able to really use the internet,
right,
and have that in place. Can you share any insights or lessons learned from your work promoting disability rights and accessibility that you believe would be valuable for future generations of advocates?
Well, I think that the internet access is probably the biggest one, but also working on making sure that accessibility in transportation and so forth, because it's important for those of us with disabilities. A lot of us aren't able to drive. So having transportation to get to work, or have transportation to get to church, or to get to a store and so forth becomes critical. And so with this infrastructure bill that's been signed into law this year, that whole effort also will improve the transportation system. I was just at the White House a couple of weeks ago, where the Secretary of Transportation and the Vice President were pushing in regards to getting some of this done. But that whole effort, which is the law, but implementing now the law, will have a huge impact for those of us with disabilities here in the United States.
Yeah, I agree with that. So on some final closing thoughts, what message would you like to convey on this to this audience on the 33rd anniversary of the ADA? And what call to action should we leave them with?
Well, I think the most important thing is for those of us with disabilities is to believe in ourselves. We have to, I always like to say, we have to end up loving ourselves, because if we can't believe or be positive and so forth, we really can't influence the rest of the world in regards to who we are, what we need, and so forth. So we have to be comfortable with ourselves. That's the most important thing in regards to our whole movement. We also need to make sure our parents give us an opportunity to fail. Again, as I say, if we have the opportunity to fail, we can then succeed. But a lot of parents, out of love, basically restrict what those of us with disabilities can and cannot do. So it's changing that attitude. And then, of course, the most important thing is getting a job. And so I say to young people, be positive, be aggressive, speak up, speak out. Don't be afraid to speak up to power. We have a right to demand and expect that we have a right to participate in society like anybody else. But it's important that we, young and old, we are willing to insist that our rights are there and go after it. I think that's exciting. We're making great progress. Things are turning. And, just a few years ago, people could discriminate against us legally, and now they can't. But we have to stand up for those rights, just like everybody else has to stand up for their rights. But our community needs to do that as well.
Yeah, we made a lot of progress over the last few years, but there's still a lot more to go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for everything that you've done for the community, Tony. Really appreciate your efforts on this. You've been a singular, hardworking focus on this issue, and I really appreciate this.
Thank you, David. It's my ministry and my passion. I just feel I have to pay back for all the positive things that have happened to me. We're making a difference. That's what's exciting. Thank you, David.
Yes, you are. Thank you.